27, 1906 to July 26, 1984, was an American murderer and grave robber. His murders have inspired many movies, including Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. He grew up in a family of 4 with his mother, Augusta Wilhelmine Gein, his father, George Philip, and his older brother, Henry. Of course, he didn't have a very normal childhood, because Mother Augusta was a very religious and authoritarian woman. The father, on the other hand, was not the pillar of the house, but a man who constantly drank in the corner and could not keep his wife's word. In short, Augusta was the one who ruled both the children and the father. His mother has a great influence on him. After his father and older brother, and his mother passed away in 1945, Ed is left alone in the world. Having a religious belief to the degree of bigotry, Augusta instilled her own thoughts in her children, constantly impressing on their minds how sinful sexual desires are. While running a small grocery store, Augusta was saving money and wanted to buy a farm to keep her children away from the evils of the outside world. And the dominant woman was finally able to save the necessary money and buy the house of her dreams. There was no one around their new house on a large estate. They started to live a life free from so-called sins and sinners in their homes, where their nearest neighbors are 1.5 kilometers away. Ed Gein, who grew up in such a family, was a child who did not make friends with anyone other than his older brother when he reached school age. Ed, who is a very shy child, was also described as girlish by his peers. While he was already failing enough at making friends, her mother's restrictive rules were added to it. Whenever he got close to a peer his age, Augusta took over the situation and wouldn't let him make friends. Although this situation upset Ed, he remained silent about his devotion and love for his mother, obeying everything he said. His older brother, Henry, was critical of Ed's strange attachment to his mother and was often expressive in conversations with Augusta. That's why Henry's death at a young age caused Ed Gein to be suspected years later. While the strange family life of 4 people continued, as a result of his father's death in 1940, 3 people stayed in the big house. After her brother died a few years later, domineering parents Augusta and Ed were left on their own. Although the death of his brother Henry looked very suspicious, the police did not go too far. Because no one thought Ed could kill his brother. So how did Henry die, who often argued with his mother and upset Ed's precious mother because of his strange relationship with Ed? The incident happened on the night of May 16, 1944, when a fire was tried to be extinguished near the Gein farm. And after the fire was put out, Ed couldn't find Henry, so he called the police. After the investigation, Henry was found dead in a place where the fire could not reach. The cause of death of Henry, who had bruises on his head, was stated as lack of oxygen. It wasn't all bad for Ed Gein, who no longer had to share his mother with anyone. But the happiness of Ed, who is mentally ill, did not last long. His mother died in 1945 as a result of a heart attack. This incident was a devastating blow for Ed Gein. The psychology of Ed, who was separated from his mother for the first time in his life, is deteriorating more and more every day. Left alone, Ed began learning anatomy to resurrect his mother. Meanwhile, he was constantly going to the cemetery to visit his mother, while thinking about how he could resurrect his mother. Eventually, he started stealing corpses from the graves. It is the female body that particularly fascinates him. Ed Gein, who put his anatomy knowledge into practice on the corpses he stole, soon realized that it was not possible to resurrect his mother. Realizing that he was unable to resurrect his mother, he decides to skin the corpse of a woman his mother's age, and occasionally wears this skin, along with her mother's old clothes, as a dress. Gein, who has never had sexual intercourse in her life, does not quite understand the complex feelings he has towards women and develops a desire to be a woman. Initially contemplating self-castration, Gein gives up, believing that a woman's skin makes him look feminine enough. Gein, whose desire for women's bodies grows more and more, after a while not only removes corpses from the graves, but also decides to commit a murder since 1954 and chooses his victim from the age at which his mother died. If you become more and more skilled in leatherworking, Gein will soon start making belts from nipples, cups from skulls, and other ornaments. Ed Gein, who shot and killed 54-year-old Mary Hogan, a bar owner, with his gun, carried her to his car and took her home. Ed, who made a woman's mask by peeling off her facial skin, made many different items from the woman's body. Ed Gein, who killed 58-year-old hardware store owner Bernice C. Worden in 1957, was caught shortly after this murder. After his first murder, the town sheriff tracks down and arrests Ed Gein. Searching the house, the police encounter many cadavers, necklaces made of human lips, and other strange objects. He thinks that Gein must have committed more murders than once, but later investigations reveal that these body parts were cut from the corpses of old women unearthed from the nearby cemetery. While Ed Gein was being interrogated, his house was searched, the evidence was photographed, and then all was destroyed. The psychopath, who told the police that he visited the cemeteries 40 times between 1947 and 1952, said that he collected himself and returned home in 30 visits. The serial killer, who did not rape any of the corpses, said that they smelled very bad as the reason for this, and he had not had sexual intercourse with anyone in his entire life. Ed Gein, who did not accept the accusations of necrophilia and cannibalism, claimed that he made those items to decorate his house. The mentally ill man, who did not show any signs of emotion during the interrogations, was brought before the judge on the 21st of November 1957 for first-degree murder. Gein vehemently denies accusations of necrophilia and cannibalism. According to him, he committed the murders only to decorate his home. However, it was decided that he was mentally unstable and was admitted to a high-security mental hospital. Ed Gein, whose house was set on fire on March 20, 1958, just shrugged when he heard the news. In addition, his car was bought by Bunny Gibbons for $76 at an auction and later shown at fairs for a fee. Ed Gein, who the doctors said could go to trial in 1968, appeared before the judge Robert H. Gallmar on the 14th of November and the case lasted for 1 week. However, it was decided that his mental health was not good and he was sent back to a mental hospital. He is known as a quiet, gentlemanly serial killer. The journalist who interviewed him at the hospital treated her very well, danced with her and managed to impress her with her behavior. He is also a serial killer who says his greatest pleasure is to dance in the moonlight in clothes made from women's leather. Ed Gein, who stayed in the hospital for years, died on July 26, 1984 due to cancer-related respiratory and heart failure and was buried next to his mother. Gein, who was not imprisoned thanks to his insane report, spent the rest of his life in correctional facilities and died in 1984, at the age of 77, of cancer, which he had suffered for a long time. Ed Gein gained a great reputation with the influence of the media after his capture. The townspeople described Ed Gein with his strange smiles and strange sense of humor. Ed Gein, who was learned by everyone as a legendary serial killer over time, has been the subject of movies, books and songs. The psychotic killer, first described in the 1974 movie Deranged, later inspired movies such as In the Light of the Moon, name changed to Ed Gein, Psycho, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2000.